Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Breaking news. An independent advisory board, and we'll define what that is and who these people are in just a second, just decided to uphold the ban that Facebook and Instagram had on Donald Trump's account permanently. So they've decided that Facebook was right to do what they did, that Trump violated Facebook's community standards. Here are the two moments that this advisory board said justifies banning, again, the President of the United States from social media. And real quick, before I even play these first two, I should say the board said that it was the riot at the Capitol that was the final straw, and they said 5 people died during that riot. Who's going to tell them that one person died because of the actual riot? Ashley Babbitt, the woman who was shot by the Capitol police officer. Everyone else either had a drug overdose, a heart attack, or a stroke that had nothing to do with the actual riot. But apparently, truth doesn't matter. Anyway, here's Trump. Well, the first thing was the video. So this was during the whole riot, like maybe an hour or so after it started. And Trump made this video, and he said, I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election. Everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing has happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace, so go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel, but go home and go home in peace. That violated Facebook's rules prohibiting praise or support of people engaged in violence. That's what the board found. Praise or support of people engaged in violence. Are you kidding me? We do not have time to show every single tweet and every single news story and every single news article from the elites about the Black Lives Matter riots this entire summer. The costliest, most deadly riots in American history. And like the entire media establishment was tripping over themselves to praise and talk. I remember nurses, right? This whole thing is like, oh, you can't even go outside. No one's allowed to go outside. And then the riots break out. And you have nurses and doctors outside the hospitals applauding the Black Lives Matter protesters. But Trump says, hey, everyone, go home, be peaceful, stop what you're doing. And he's giving praise worthy of a permanent ban. Come on. The other one was a written statement. That was a video. The other one was a written statement. These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously, viciously ripped from the great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and peace. Remember this day forever. So the initial ban from Facebook was indefinitely for at least the next 2 weeks. And then they pass it off to this independent board or whatever. And here we are. This is... It's just, really think about we think of him as Trump, right? President of the United States, completely banned from the best way to communicate with the people today, right? It's one of the main reasons why he won. He could bypass the media, and now he can't. And he's been, I would argue, relegated to a non-player, right? The media just ignores him now. Live by the sword, die by the sword, but it shows the power of the media and social media, which are the same thing. The great Will Chamberlain is here from Human Events. Will, how are you, brother?
Hey, good to be with you.
Man, first of all, your overall assessment, any clarification or correction on anything I just said before we talk about who this board even is?
No, I mean, I think you got it basically right. We have this, we can get into exactly what the board is, but, Facebook created its own court with its own judges, hand-selected judges to apply its own law. And we're supposed to treat that as though it's like a legitimate court decision, as opposed to, just like an authority patting itself on the back and saying it did a good job. We only really tolerate that sort of thing with sovereigns, right? The federal government has to figure out a way to adjudicate when it itself has wronged someone, because there's nobody who can control the federal government above it. But we don't tolerate that with companies. Like, that's nonsense. If you want judicial legitimacy, then submit yourself to our federal court system.
Yeah, that's so weird. That's so weird.
Right.
That's like if I set up my own little advisory council here to tell me what a great segment that was and pretend it had the legal authority of a Supreme Court decision.
Right.
Like, what a weird
You
thing.
know, because it's weird. Like, there are, companies all the time set up like advisory boards who administer reports, right? That's fairly common. And if they administer those reports, they give those reports and they're like, we think the company should do X for reasons Y, Z. But this doesn't read like an advisory report. It reads like a court decision, but it's not a court. It's a board. And so this is the way I look at it is, again, it's just play acting. They're trying to get the sheen of legitimacy, like there's judicial supervision or some sort of authority or precedent. They're playing following the forms of judicial decision making, but it's like cargo cult stuff. It's not actually they're not submitting themselves to a sovereign authority. They're just having the board saying Facebook must do this. Well. Or what? What enforcement authority does this oversight board have outside of what Facebook decides it will do anyway? It's just literally like a committee.
Yeah. So who is it? And do they only have authority over Facebook and Instagram, which is the same company, or is it like all social media companies that buy into this, or is it just a Facebook thing? And who are these?
It's just a Facebook thing. Facebook, I think maybe about a year ago decided they needed something like this. Facebook selected the members of the board, appointed them themselves. They did set up like an independent trust. So it's not like their continued funding is dependent on them doing things Facebook likes. They do have like independent funding, but that's the extent to which they're meaningfully independent, right? They're not applying American law. They're applying Facebook's rules and policies, right? Facebook sets its own rules and policies. And then they're looking at individual censorship decisions and analyzing in their own way whether they think they comply with Facebook's rules and policies, and they tell Facebook to change the decision if they don't agree that it abides by Facebook's rules and policies. So I would say better than absolutely nothing, perhaps, but not even close to the level of supervision necessary to actually make them adhere to American First Amendment norms, right, and our culture of free speech, which this is flying in the face of. I mean, this isn't applying First Amendment American law or even American norms. This is applying like UN, HCR, human rights, free expression norms without any meaningful citations to precedent. There's no case law. There's no attempt to say this is what things have been done in the past. They're just like, we're a bunch of smart lawyers who say that this is, this was justified.
Yeah, when you bring up American versus UN, are there not foreigners on this board? Like, and I don't mean that rudely. I just mean like literally like
a lot of them
on this board.
A lot of them actually, right? Like this is. I pulled up the list of it. I mean, it's something like there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Americans out of something like 20 members. And
Wait, no, hold on, no, hold on, that can't be right. You're telling me there's around 20 members and 5 Americans?
Yeah, I mean the idea is it's a global board for all their decisions, so that one of the there's 4 co-chairs, 2 of them are Americans, one's from Colombia, one's the former prime minister of Denmark. You have someone from Ghana, some are from Indonesia, some are from Taiwan, some are from Pakistan, some are from Yemen, someone from Kenya, someone from Brazil, someone from India, someone from Israel, someone from Hungary, someone from Cameroon and France. I mean, it's like you have. It's supposed to be this global perspective, but I'm sorry, I don't submit to the notion. Facebook's an American company, right? Like that's another big problem here. Like, okay, you guys can apply whatever international norms you want in your little international tribunals, but I'm not going to call your censorship legitimate unless you're abiding by American free speech law as if you were a public institution and it's decided by an American court applying American law. Like, because you're an American company still. You're headquartered in Menlo Park and you're censoring the American president of the United States. I don't want to hear about international norms when it comes to his censorship decision.
Will, I think that's the story here. That this is like the next step towards like the global citizen and global. Oh man, here I am. Will, I'm going to like world government stuff, right? But right, talk me off that ledge. But this is a big problem if we keep going down this road of, you're right, UN norms imposed on American society. We are very different and unique and for the better.
Yeah, UN norms applied by privately owned advisory boards owned by monopoly American companies. No. But this is, here's the thing. Like, if Facebook wants to set up its own boards to evaluate its own decisions, that's cool. And they're like, I will give them, in this instance, they're a private company, they can do what they want. If they want to set up their own boards, that by all means, but that doesn't mean any American should give even the slightest legitimacy or treat this with the slightest more than it's just might as well just be a letter from Zuckerberg. Just don't, this is not a legitimate decision about censorship. And from our perspective, it just emphasizes the need that, okay, like here's I think the best takeaway from this. Facebook is basically, by doing this, conceding that the power they wield with censorship is very nearly sovereign. Okay, if it's a very nearly sovereign censorship power that Facebook wields because its platform is so huge, then guess what? Let's treat it like a sovereign and say the First Amendment applies to you, and you can only censor people for actually imminently inciting violence. And if they didn't do that, you leave them on the platform, because you're just like a public university, you're just like the federal government, you're just like a public park. You can only censor based if the Supreme Court precedent says that that's allowed. Otherwise, stay out of it.
Let me ask you for more on that, because that's really important. Because we know how bunk that is. So let's talk about how it should be. And let me start with this question, because this is sort of the libertarian argument, right? That it's a private company, they can do what they want. And it's no different than the bakery in Colorado where the gay couple wanted him to make the cake for their gay wedding, and he said no, and conservatives came to his defense. He's a private company, he can do whatever he wants. Same thing with Facebook, they're a private company, they can do whatever they want. I'll give you one more example. We're right here on the First, right? We're this growing startup news company, and Bernie Sanders wants a show. And we say, no, Bernie, we're not going to have, oh, you're censoring me. And we say, oh, we're a private company, we can do what you want. How is Facebook different than the First or different than the bakery?
Okay, so first on the baker, I mean, the fact that that example even comes up indicates that the underlying thesis, or the overarching thesis rather, not underlying, overarching, is that the private companies can do whatever they want is wrong. That's not true under American law. It hasn't been true for over 100 years since the Railroad Antitrust Acts of the 1880s, when railroads, who were the first who had monopolies in their areas, thought they could do whatever they want, and the federal government said, no, actually, you're subject to anti-discrimination laws. You can't discriminate against different railroad traffic, and we're tired of you behaving in a monopolistic fashion. Everything is subject. People forget that there's a commerce clause that says the federal government has the right to regulate interstate commerce, and that includes the behavior of private actors engaged in interstate commerce. Additionally, that thesis would completely overturn the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So, the moment somebody starts talking about the privileged right of companies to do whatever they want, and I immediately go straight to, okay, so they can discriminate against black people then, right? They can just exclude black people from their place of business. Because if you don't agree with that, then that might seem extreme or like, oh, that's too far. But the point being, like, well, you've conceded that clearly private companies cannot do whatever they want, that there are some restraints placed on them by the public. And now we're just debating about exactly where the line is for which restraints we should put on them. I think in general, we should be opposed to restraining private industry because government generally doesn't know best. But when it comes to things like, monopolies using their market power for political purposes to censor political speech, I mean, it gets to the core of having a meaningful First Amendment right to speak in public. That's clearly, I think, something that should be protected. I'll quickly get to the 2 points you made. One, how is this different than a baker? A baker's one dude in Colorado. Facebook's $1 trillion private company. I think it's acceptable to think that the regulations imposed on $1 trillion companies should be more onerous than those imposed on individual random bakers, both in terms of the ability of Facebook to deal with regulation like that, and also from the perspective of the harm to consumers is so much less from when there is a truly meaningfully competitive market. I don't think there's a monopoly over baking in random little towns in Colorado. I think people could find another place to get a cake. There isn't another Facebook, not meaningfully. And then finally, how is it different from the First? Well, Section 230 explained that one. You're a publisher. You own responsibility for what you say. You're liable in defamation if you say something false that damages someone. Facebook is a platform. It has complete immunity from what its users say. It's not speaking. And I think because we recognize as a society that they're not the speaker, that their entire business model is predicated on just opening the platform and allowing people to speak freely, that part of that should include a responsibility to actually maintain it as a free speech platform in accordance with American First Amendment norms. And if you don't want to do that, then I think the trade-off between then giving you this liability protection really doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so let's go back to what you said maybe 2 minutes ago, which was what it should be, or what they should be, what First Amendment norms they should be held to.
Right. Well, I think that, the goal is, I think Facebook, you should have the same right to speak on Facebook that you do in a public park. Now, what that would mean is passing a law that says, for the purposes of free speech, censorship, Facebook and large social media companies are treated as equivalent to public institutions. So they're governed by the same rules that, if a public university wants to not prevent a speaker from showing up, they have to, abide by the First Amendment because they're a public institution. If a public park, or a city doesn't want to grant a permit to a march, they have to abide by First Amendment rules, and it's very, very challenging. I just think that we already have this entire body of case law developed over 100 years about when a public institution can ban certain speech, under what circumstances they can do it, what kind of speech they can ban. Just take that case law and say, well, now this applies to Facebook and Twitter.
So what would get banned and what wouldn't get banned?
So, under current law, you can't immediately incite someone to violence. That's not allowed. That's a big one. On the other hand, so-called hate speech, like the federal government doesn't recognize a category of hate speech, so you just simply couldn't censor someone for speaking hatefully. On the other hand, like defamatory speech is unlawful, but then you can't also have prior restraints on defamatory speech that's settled through damages. So I think, there would be a very narrow category of the type of speech you could censor that would, just follow from what the Supreme Court has said. But it's a very narrow set of categories. Actually, I need to go back and reread what categories of speech are actually allowed to be censored by the Supreme Court. Time, place, and manner restrictions, but in general, not very much.
And the president saying, hey, everyone, go home. You're very special, but go home peacefully. Would that be bannable?
No, because it's not active incitement to violence. If it's an advocate of peaceful behavior, right? The way that the Facebook court resolved it was saying, well, he was expressing support for people engaged in violent action when he called them great people, or this is a great day or something. But you actually, under a First Amendment analysis, if this were a public institution censoring the president, that wouldn't be nearly good enough. They'd have to prove that he was inciting imminent violence. And that's clearly, he's doing the opposite of that when he's telling people to stop being violent.
All right. Will Chamberlain, man, appreciate you. Will Chamberlain on Twitter, and then Human Events, of course. Will, thanks for your insight, brother.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. And we called Will just a little bit ago and asked him to come on. He was Johnny on the spot, so I appreciate that very much, Will. Listen, I got to go here, but here's how it matters to you. If they can do this to the President of the United States, then of course they'll do it to anyone they want, you included. The power of these social media companies is unprecedented, but the desire to do what they're doing is nothing new, and that's just the purging of dissidents. Stalin had his Great Purge in 1934. It's an estimated 750,000 people were killed, 1 million more banished from society. Some had big show trials, some just vanished, disappeared. Even before they had Photoshop, they were purging people from history. Here's an example of it right there. That guy on the left was purged from history, and that was the new photo on the right. That was 1934. The instinct is the same today. It's just easier than ever for social media companies to do it. And they will keep doing it, which is why, by the way, we are now my show is over at mikeslater.locals.com. So everything I put over there is on mikeslater.locals.com. It's owned by Dave Rubin. It is not big tech. It is anti-big tech. It's a wonderful community. Join us over there at mikeslater.locals.com. Also, we'll go out this first segment with a tribute to one of the greatest tweets ever. This day in history, 5 years ago, happy Cinco de Mayo. Hey, Slater Crusaders, in the next segment, we're going to talk about a bill in Florida that our next president, Ron DeSantis, signed that makes it illegal to ban politicians from social media accounts. We'll talk about what that bill exactly looks like coming up next. First, I want to talk about COVID. I got one COVID segment for the day, and I want to talk about COVID and kids. Your kid is way more likely to die driving to school, on their way to school. You drive them to school. They're way more likely to die there than they are from COVID. People need to get this through their heads. The true story is you do not need to fear your kids and COVID. Stop with the panic. Stop with the torturous precautions at school. I just during the break here saw a picture of a kindergarten teacher with 4 kindergarten students with masks on in a hula hoop. They were each in hula hoops on different parts of the room. That's child abuse. Everyone's lost their minds. There's a physics teacher at a high school in San Francisco. He had an investigation against him because on March 29th, over spring break, he led a activity about circuits with his students. It was an optional event, optional, parents' written permission, outside in a public park, distanced, masked, and he still got in trouble because he broke COVID protocol. What COVID protocol could he possibly have broken? Because the gathering involved more than 3 households. There were 11 students there. You with me? High school teacher, outside, masked, distanced, but more than 3 households. You broke the rules. It was in San Francisco. This won't get better. This won't get better. People they just double down. All right, all these masked people are going to double down more and more, even on our kids, just to show how woke and pro-science they are. Ron DeSantis, as we talked about yesterday, and other Republicans, they say they're not going to wear masks anymore. The left will double down even more. Because we can't have unity on anything, right? That's not allowed, even on something as rock solid as vaccinated people don't need to wear masks and kids don't need to wear masks. We can't even have unity on that. That's how sick we are as a country. We are sick. We are a sick country. There was this glimmer of hope early, middle of this pandemic that we would bounce back, right? As a country, we would bounce back stronger than ever and we'd usher in the new roaring 20s. No way. No way, because we're not going to bounce back because we're not an elastic rubber band anymore. We're not a healthy elastic rubber band. We're an old, dried, cracked, mushy rubber band. We don't bounce back. Not like we used to. We can't even agree that science teacher is awesome and did a great thing. Oh, you broke the COVID rules. I want to give you right now the numbers when it comes to COVID and kids. Let's put this to bed once and for all. Try to remember these numbers so you can share these with your teacher in your school and people around you. People who yell at you at the grocery store because your kid isn't wearing a mask. All right, the flight attendant who kicks you off the plane because your 2-year-old won't wear the mask. Again, your kids are way more likely to die in a car accident driving to school than they are ever from COVID. The last year and a half, how many kids have died from COVID? Excuse me, how many kids under 18? That's the definition of kids. How many people under the age of 18? How many kids have died from COVID? 450. As you see here, in 2019, 600 died from the flu. And that's even with a certain percentage of kids getting a flu vaccine. What precautions did you take to prevent the flu? Disney World's never shut down. We've never put plexiglass barriers between your kids and shamed your kids into wearing masks every second of their lives because of the flu, even though more kids died from the flu in 2019 than kids have died from COVID. As you saw there, kids are more likely to die from homicides, drowning, even fires and burns, right? Now, you may rightfully ask, say, but Slater, but that's because not a lot of kids died from COVID because kids stayed home and they're masking. Not a lot of kids got COVID. No, they're getting it. Kids who got COVID, the death rate is the same as the death rate for kids who get the flu. So let me translate this graph. So the one on the left are kids ages 0 to 4. That red is the death rate. So that's the number of kids per 100,000 who get COVID who die. That's the red graph. All the other gray lines are flus for previous years. So the death rate for kids 0 to 5 with COVID are the exact same as the death rate from the flu last year. The graph on the right-hand side are kids ages 5 to 17, and you can see it's the exact same thing, right? The number of kids per 100,000 who get COVID, who die, is the exact same, and in some years, much less than the kids who get flu. Just to back, right? Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to appeal to authority here, just so it's not some crazy conservative on the TV here saying this. This is professor of epidemiology at University of Minnesota. It's very unusual for kids to get very sick. This is the infectious disease specialist at the University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League school. For the average kid, COVID is a negligible risk. This is a professor at Harvard School of Public Health. For people under the age of 18, COVID's really not that big of a risk. I do think of it as on par with the risk from flu. Twice as many kids drown each year as have died from COVID. Twice as many. 5 times as many die in car accidents. If society's main goal was to prevent all childhood death, then we would never let them in a car or near a pool. I don't know what the heck has happened to people's brains that we've lost all risk assessment ability. Our perspectives are way off of reality. People were asked what percentage of deaths, right? So you think of all the people who have died from COVID, it's like 600,000 or something. All the people who have died from COVID. What percentage of those deaths are people under the age of 25? All the people who have died from COVID, what percentage are under the age of 25? The average answer people gave was 8%, and liberals gave much more than that. The actual answer, what would you say? Of all the people who have died from COVID, what percentage of those who died are under the age of 25? The average answer is 8%. The reality is 0.1%. Okay, it's like no one. All right, that's that point. Make a second point. Are you with me? You do not need to be worried about your kids with COVID. They don't need to separate. They don't need to be distanced. They certainly don't need to be masked. Let them be with kids, play with kids, breathe on each other. They're fine. Here's my biggest concern with COVID right now. It's how it's going to change our culture. And it's going to affect kids the most, right? Because they don't know much different, right? I was just with a 6-year-old yesterday who has to wear a mask all day. He's wore a mask for 1/6 of his life, and really like half of his, like a life that he remembers. So it's harder for him to go back to normal. This is his normal, right? It's changing who we are because it's been going on for far too long. We used to be in America a people who first told the government to go pound sand, and second, used to be a risk-taking people, right? We've had a decade or so of a growing weakness in America, right? A lot of younger people with the whole, oh, I can't even, right? The world's too difficult to handle. I can't overcome it. I'm a victim, blah, 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 right? So that's already been the new American ethos, and that's a massive problem. So from that, we've now, over this last year, become the people of, oh, whatever you say, CDC, I'll obey your guidelines. Whatever your guidelines are, I'll do it. And don't do anything, too risky. Don't take that mask off, too risky. COVID didn't cause this. It's been a long time coming, but COVID's made it way worse and way more widespread. We used to be a culture where we would encourage massive amounts of risk. Physical risk, like let's build massive buildings. Let's build a massive bridge. 11 people, look at that guy. Look at that guy. You kidding me? 11 people died making the Golden Gate Bridge, and they thought that was a great success. The rule of thumb back in the day was 1 death per $1 million project. So they thought 35 people were going to die building the Golden Gate Bridge. And they were like, well, whatever, got to build the bridge. 35 people are going to die, let's just do it. Right? People took their entire families across the unknown middle of the country out west. Everything you did back then was an incredible risk. That's the Mayflower right there, right? Every colonist who got on that ship, they knew that there were entire shipfuls of people before them who went to the New World and died. Everyone died. And they still got on that boat with eyes wide open. That's who we are. That's who we are as a people. And then the next generation after that, knew who they were, and they settled west. And the next generation after that took risks. And now you won't even go outside with a mask on. That's insane. This is a big problem. 65 days it took to get across the sea in that Mayflower. 65 days. And then when they got there, they had to wait another couple more months before they could get on shore. And people were dying every day. And everyone was near death, and they were in this cramped, tiny, dark, wet, rat-infested hull of a ship. Huge risk, and they took it. And they knew what they were up against, and they did it anyway. And that guy in that picture we showed before, he climbed that building and hammered in rivets or whatever without any safety equipment at all, because that's what you did. And this is why our economy is the best in the world. We're not the smartest people in the country. We're the biggest risk takers. In Japan, they have a very different culture. They're way smarter, right? But if you try something and you fail in Japan, you're shamed. You and your family are shamed forever. If you can be an idiot and you try and fail in America, and there's no shame. Great effort. Let's get back on that horse, try again. In fact, the more times you try and fail, the better. That's why we've become the greatest economy in the world, truly. It's not because we're smarter than everyone else. It's because we're risk takers. And now we're a risk adverse people. No risk. Your chance of dying from COVID after getting a vaccine is 0.0001%. That's 3 zeros. You have a way higher likelihood of getting struck by lightning. So I got to go. The true story is we've become a lazy people, right? Lazy. During this whole COVID thing, have you had to go out and fend for yourself to provide for your family? No, you order stuff on Amazon Prime and Instacart and DoorDash and watch Netflix. And to show how really noble you are, you go around, you shame people for going to the beach or for having their mask not over their nose. And you don't really have to go to church. You can just watch it at your leisure whenever you'd like. This is how passive, lazy, antisocial, and risk-adverse we become. So, what do? Do the opposite. You be active, engaged. How did I put? I said lazy. You're passive, lazy, antisocial, and risk-adverse. So we got to be the opposite. Active, engaged, social, and take risks. And raise your kids to be the same. Or you can let our culture raise your kids to be a victim and live in fear. Masked and very safe. Your choice. True story. Thanks, Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we kicked off the show with the breaking news that this pseudo Facebook oversight board shockingly agreed with Facebook's decision to ban the president permanently from Facebook. Weird. Here's a statement from the former president. What Facebook, Twitter, and Google have done is a total disgrace and embarrassment to our country. Free speech has been taken away from the president of the United States because the radical left lunatics are afraid of the truth. But the truth will come out anyway, bigger and stronger than ever before. The people of our country will not stand for it. These corrupt social media companies must pay a political price and must never again be allowed to destroy and decimate our electoral process. So nothing's going to happen legislatively to solve this problem out of D.C. right now. But our future president, Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, passed a bill or signed a bill just the other day on this topic right here. Amy Tarkanian is here. Amy, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Mike?
Really good to talk to you. So tell me about this Florida bill. What did Ron DeSantis do?
Sure. Well, first of all, you mentioned that he may be our next president in 2024. And I actually put together a poll on Twitter today, and it showed Trump, DeSantis ticket, DeSantis, other, or other, for both, for president and vice president. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, DeSantis being the presidential candidate actually came out on top. It's not over. We've had 9,774 people vote, but it's 49% DeSantis with someone else, 47% Trump DeSantis ticket with 4% none of these. Now, Floridians, they want to keep him. And rightfully so, because he's doing an amazing job. I have another friend who actually nicknamed him the executioner because he moves quickly and swiftly and kills every progressive bill dead in its tracks very quickly. So the fact that in this bill that he has actually put forward, is it constitutional? That's debatable. I don't know if it's going to actually have legs, but it does open up the discussion of the fact that is it okay for private entities, which Facebook and Twitter are, they are not public, they are not regulated by the government, which that's actually, I think, his intent of bringing this bill forward, is many people are finding that they've overstepped their bounds and there does need to be some regulation because this now, as you know, you have candidates, you have elected officials that do advertise on these platforms, and they have been either shadow banned or they've been denied access or they've been limited, and that's not okay.
And so if I'm right here, the bill in Florida says social media companies cannot ban politicians from their platforms. Right.
And they also want to fine them $100,000 per day if they choose to do that.
The bill, which still allows for politicians to be suspended for 2 weeks and for individual posts to be taken down if they violate the company's policies, the person just can't be banned. That,
Right.
So what do you think about it? Does that seem fair or not?
Well, it depends. How much is that grace period going to be in between the 2-week ban? Are they going to then give it right back to you for, say, 20 seconds and then ban you again for another 2 weeks? I mean, who's to say where the fine line is going to be drawn with these private entities? Until they're regulated, I think it's beyond our control.
So what are you doing personally? What do you recommend people do with big tech?
Well, we saw Parler that made a big attempt, a big splash, and that was shut down pretty quickly. And the fact that now we have President Trump that has come forward with his new platform, it's basically more like a blog of sorts where all of his followers can log in and they can receive his updates, and then they can choose to repost them on Twitter or Facebook for him. Now, it's going to be interesting to see if these social media platforms, how long will it be before they actually stop allowing those reposts to take place? Are they going to then penalize you or I for reposting those? I have no idea. It's left to be insane.
Yeah, they probably will. I mean, if we post something from this show on some of these social media accounts, the algorithm catches up on it and they can delete an episode or a clip that we post as well. So they'll know and they'll be onto that as well. Anna, we got to run. Anna Tarkanian from Nevada. Anna, appreciate your time. Amy, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yes, you too.
The power of these social media companies is something, and we can debate, and we will debate, private company, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to marvel at the power they have and the influence they have. I'd say Google more than anyone. I mean, what percentage of Google searches are on Google versus anyone else? And they decide what is shown and what is not shown. If you're not on that front page, if you're not those first 3 things that pop up, then you're nowhere. And it's entirely up to them. They dictate everything. You can Google Capitol Hill riot. What are the first few things that pop up? Google decides. Is it going to be the truth is it going to be a proper perspective? Is it going to be an honest perspective? Is it going to talk about, like the Facebook Council did, 5 people died in the riot? Or is it going to be a post or a segment we do on this show where we say, no, it wasn't 5 people who died. They had heart attacks and strokes and drug overdoses and suicides a couple weeks later. But that's not a death at the Capitol riot. There was just the one, Ashley Babbitt, killed by the Capitol police officer, right? So is Google going to share that stuff? No, they decide whatever wants to be seen. And it's going to be true of the social media companies, and it's only going to get worse, which is why we're out. I am personally, MikeSlater.locals.com. Join us over there instead. It's a totally new community, brand new platform. It's the one I'm going all in on. Dave Rubin owns it. I trust him and the people he's surrounding himself with. And there's good people there, and I'd love for you to join us there too. MikeSlater.locals.com. Spread the word. Mitt at the Utah GOP. So I just can't help but remember when Trump said that Mitt Romney walks like a penguin. And when he held a fundraiser event at his Trump Tower apartment, Mitt Romney ruined his carpets. One more setup here before our next guest. This is Kevin McCarthy. He's the leader of the House Republicans. And this is a hot mic moment when he was on Fox News yesterday.
I think she's got real problems. I've had it with her. It's, I've lost confidence. Well, someone just has to bring emotion, but I assume that will probably take place.
So my understanding is he's talking about Liz Cheney, who's Dick Cheney's daughter, Congresswoman up in Wyoming, who's number 3 in the GOP leadership. And you just heard him say there that he lost confidence in her. Let's go to our next guest to get some more detail here. Libby Emmons is here from the wonderful Post Millennial. Libby, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm glad you're here. So Liz Cheney, let's talk about that aspect of it. Like, how did she become the number 3 in the House Republican Party, and what's the problem with her?
Well, I think she is representative of the old version of the GOP, and the new version is moving quickly away from that. They don't want anything to do with it. And I think they're right. I don't think the old GOP speaks for the 75 million people that voted for Trump in the last election. And I think that McCarthy is, right to try and push her out of the way a little bit. It's up to her constituents, of course. But yeah, it's pretty interesting to see that going on.
What's her platform? Like, what's the deal? Why is she different?
Well, she voted against, she voted in favor of Trump's impeachment, and she's one of the only ones that did that. And I think she's been really outspoken about being opposed to the new platform, the whole America First thing. And she's representative of the, that whole side of things that the new GOP doesn't really want to have any part of.
Yeah, which is fine. Like, she can be a congresswoman in a Republican congresswoman. That's fine. But I think the problem is she's the number 3, ranking in leadership, and that seems unnecessary, right?
Right. Well, that's going to be up to them to decide how to handle that. But she's had a lot of power, and whether or not she keeps that in the party is going to be up to the compromises that they're going to have to make there. And if she's not really representing the party, then I don't think she should, be held up to that position.
Yeah, here's what I don't understand about this whole the old guard versus the new guard. The old guard, the Mitt Romneys and the Liz Cheneys, they look at Trump and the way the Republican Party is going now as divisive and mean and racist and all these other bad things, right? But we saw in the last election, Trump doubled the number of gay people who voted for him over 2016. Higher turnout or higher votes of black people, Hispanic people, right? All Muslims, right? You name the group. He's like, if you look at that, he's like less divisive and actually more inclusive than any Republican in the old guard who ever ran. What do you make of that?
Well, except for white people, right? He lost a lot of white voters, white college-educated voters in the suburbs. So maybe those are the people that Liz Cheney is trying to keep in touch with, all these white guys that didn't vote for Trump. I think another piece of it, too, is Cheney and people like her look at Trump's oeuvre. They look at his demeanor. They look at, his bluster and his pomp, and they don't like that. And they don't dig in to see what it is that appeals to voters about his policies and about the direction he wanted to take the country in, which a lot of people really could get on board with. So, and I think that in a lot of ways, that's very similar to what the Democrats hated about Trump. They hated the appearance of him, the persistent calls to resist everything he did without taking a look at what it was, just saying because he represented it, that makes it unpalatable. And she's part of that. It's interesting to see that.
Yeah, we have a clip here that we don't have time to play, but it's AOC talking about how Joe Biden's been more progressive than she thought he would. So there's a little bit of unity there in the Democratic Party. Go ahead.
I thought that was fascinating. I loved seeing AOC during the election say that she was afraid that Biden wasn't going to be progressive enough. And now, of course, he's fulfilling her wildest dreams about a progressive administration. I think this was a bait and switch. So the Never Trumpers were clearly on board with Biden because they figured that he wasn't going to be as progressive as the far left of the party. And it turns out that he's exactly what AOC and that whole wing wanted. And they should, be kind of ashamed of themselves for giving the country away like that, because they thought that a Biden presidency would mean they could take back conservatism. And instead, they just handed it over to these crazy people.
Yeah. Libby Emmons, post-millennial. Thanks, Libby.
Thanks.
Every time there's a new ridiculous policy about abortion or Green New Deal or whatever, I just think of all the people who voted against Trump because he was so mean. He had mean tweets, and I didn't like it. Give me a break. True story. Mike Slater. See you tomorrow. Spread the word.